Hi, this is Paul. I'm going to do something a little strange again with this video. Last week I made a video about why the same-sex marriage debate is so reactive, and I made that as a reaction to some of the comments about my same-sex marriage and the patriarchs video. Now, normally when I make a video, it's not uncommon for me to feel uneasy about my video. I very seldom look back over them. Usually, if I feel uneasy about it, I think about the fact that I just spent a couple of hours maybe putting the video together, and it's like, throw it out there, I'll post it. Every now and then I'll delete one, and I delete it so that I can't post it. This one that you're about to see, I hung on to, and that really demonstrates the amount of internal dissonance I have over this issue. And I held on to it for a week, and I thought about deleting it, and I never deleted it, and I finished up my rough draft. Today is the 17th of April. The rough draft will post Saturday. I usually post my rough drafts lately on Saturday, so the 18th, that's about Peter. This will post probably on the 20th, which will be a Monday. But my thinking, on Maundy Thursday, Sam talked with Brett Sockold, and I was really inspired by that conversation, let's say. And so I posted it with a front end, and that one's up there with the following thumbnail that you can see on this slide, Confessional Conversations Done Right, Transubstantiation and Incarnation. And I was very pleased with the response from that video. The confessional conversation idea came to me as I continued to work through what has been a slow simmering in the Christian Reformed Church over same-sex marriage. This is an issue that has splintered mainline denominations. The older churches, such as the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic, deal with it in interesting different ways. Andrew Sullivan, one of the most outspoken proponents for same-sex marriage, continues to identify in some ways as a Roman Catholic, which I find fascinating, the way these things work in the Catholic, especially the Catholic churches. It fascinates me. But the Christian Reformed Church is sort of a church in the middle. The Reformed Church of America has been just shredded by this issue, and the conversation that I did with my friend Andrew, the group of 4 pastors from British Columbia, bear witness to that, where you've got some churches, Reformed Church of America churches in British Columbia, considering seriously joining the Christian Reformed Church, and my friend Andrew's idea that maybe we can solve this by churches that wish to affirm same-sex marriages heading to the RCA, and churches that don't heading to the CRC, and then that'll settle the issue. I appreciate, I don't know what the future holds. Again, if you listen to my rough draft for Sunday sermon, I bring up the Black Swan, and one of the points that Nassim Taleb keeps making in that book is that the thing we don't learn is that we don't learn. And I think that's a really wise and astute observation about human nature. So I don't know what's coming down the road, but ideas of sort of shutting things out in a Protestant denomination, I don't know if that has ever worked by virtue of the nature of Protestantism. I don't know if it's working for the Roman Catholics. And so there's rumors of war visiting your village, and for the Christian Reformed Church, that is, churches or individuals who want to make a stand and push the issue. And I'm under no, it'll come. It'll come. The pandemics, they come. The day of the Lord comes. Well, what do I mean by that? The day of the Lord is that day when it comes and again, watch the rough draft. I know some of you never watch the rough drafts, which is okay. But there's some stuff in that rough draft sermon you might be interested in, because what this pandemic is a disruption of our normal sense-making and meaning-making apparatus, to use some of the rebel wisdom nomenclature. It's a disruption, and that's what the day of the Lord does, and that's why the day of the Lord is apocalypse. It's the end of, when the Roman Empire fell, the seasons continued. Much of the earth continued, but life changed for certain groups of people because their world changed. And if you look at the language of this, it's notable and it's telling. So the day of the Lord comes. The day of the Lord comes as a pandemic. The day of the Lord comes as a church fight. And people fight when they say, well, church fights that cause the destruction of your shire. And some of us in the Christian Reformed Church imagine that if the Christian Reformed Church goes to war over this, like it went to war over women in church office, it won't survive. Well, what does that mean, it won't survive? Does that mean the churches go away? No, some churches might split. Most churches won't, but the old order of things changes. Well, the order of the Christian Reformed Church potentially changed when the banner went from a weekly to a monthly publication. The Christian Reformed Church has been changing all along, and it's only when these events happen that we look back and realize how much has changed. So, in a sense, the day of the Lord scales. The day of the Lord happens when you lose the job, or the doctor says you have cancer, or the accident takes your spouse, or an admission of betrayal destroys your marriage, or your relationship with your father or your mother or your son or your daughter, or the day of the Lord scales. It comes to us in tiny bits, and sometimes it comes to a whole world, as with a COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm going to have a conversation next week with some skeptics about that, so that should be fun. But these things come to us. And so the confessional conversation about same-sex marriage, is confessional conversation the right language? That's a hotly debated thing in very small places like CRC Voices. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't the right language, but it's the language I'm working with now. Maybe it'll change. But the point is sort of made on April 3. I don't always know when I do these things. April 3, I tweeted out, I really want to see Ross Douthat and Eric Weinstein together on Portal. And it broke this week, and I'm sure it was recorded before I ever sent that tweet. So I take no credit for it with that tweet. But I was super happy to see it. I'm only an hour in, and Sam said to me, "Oh, you're going to make like three. You're going to want to make like three videos on this podcast." And he might be right. I never know what I'm going to make videos on, because it's very Muse-ish what I finally do and don't make videos on, and if they get released or deleted. This is by no means, in case you can't tell by the production quality, or by the rambling, this is by no means some final, finished, polished project. My sermons are closer to that, but this is all work, and this is just all process work for me, thinking out loud and having someone to think with. Very much the spirit at which I approached my blog when I was writing a lot more. But Eric mentions, I haven't dug it up. I hope they do a YouTube video of it, because I can always scan those closed captionings fairly easily. But, he brought up that, things get polarized, and communities get stuck on things. The climate change argument is sort of stuck. Immigration is stuck. And part of Douthat's really astute appropriation of the word decadence for that thing that he's pointing to is sort of a mass stuckness. And that's really what Douthat is pointing to. And of course, Eric imagines he can get things unstuck, or at least wants to take a shot at it, and good on him for that. We all should try to get unstuck. But same-sex marriage and the church is stuck, and it's painful. And someone mentioned Preston Sprinkle. I've had a couple of conversations with. I should probably message Preston and say, let's do a talk about this, Preston. Because the church is stuck and Preston's trying to get it unstuck. And Confessional Conversation, I guess, is my approach for trying to get it unstuck. And my friend who's running Nuance Forum, he sees lots of stuckness and wants to get things unstuck. And I think Jordan Peterson really wanted to get things unstuck because, and none of us know what unstuck will look like. You know, do things in the age of decay ever get unstuck? I don't know. I was going to say, in some ways, the American civil rights movement led by Dr. King got some things unstuck in terms of segregation, and that was really good. But seeing, in a sense, the new woke religion, so often our solutions just seed more problems. And that's the nature of things in this world for us. So yeah, Douthat on the portal. Awesome. Can't wait to listen to that 2 or 3 times, and if it gets sufficiently stuck in my mind, there will be videos that come out. Now, I just want to make one other observation about the end of the video that this video is about to become. You'll notice the different shirts. I mean, if you want to notice when I make videos and when I post them, just watch the clothing because it'll tell you a lot. And the haircuts and the shape of the beard and so on and so forth. But I sort of tack on to the end of the video a note about what I had said about Peterson in a previous video that had gotten some commentary. Just today I did another miscellaneous comment to explain a different miscellaneous comment. I'm a hopeless case. This morning I jumped into the Discord server. Bridges of Meaning Discord server is a server that wasn't started by me. It was started by Joey and Tyler and Rick and Job and a bunch of the people in my local meetup, and it grew, and it's become a wonderful thing. I hadn't been around for a while. My participation had slowly diminished, and then the big trip with Job, which got canceled, and then the pandemic, and beginning of this week, I was a little depressed by the whole thing, but Job sent me an email and said, why don't you jump onto the Discord server? And I've been trying to figure out how to do that. So yesterday I did an @everyone, which is kind of like shooting a gun in a crowded theater, get everybody's attention annoyingly. But so then this morning at 10 a.m. I jumped on, and we just had a great time talking on the Discord server and voice chat. And I've thought about doing that once a week, and so maybe I'll be able to pull that off. I have to figure out how it fits into the rest of my schedule and my very muse-like productivity in this space. So all of that to say, how does that relate to anything that I've said? That is probably my enduring problem. All of that to say that, you know, I do listen to feedback, and after a video I made where I made a comment about Jordan, and I made some comments about Jordan in my conversation with Ron Dart, I try to be transparent in my videos, because if I'm not transparent, at least appropriately so, in these videos, what are these videos for? The greatest thing that has, one of many great things have come out of my YouTube channel, but one of the coolest things has been that the channel hasn't gotten so crazy large, and that there are many of you who comment and you write really substantive comments in YouTube, and I don't read them all, but I try to read a good number of them, and I learn a ton from your comments. I still do 2 years later, and if I had 100,000 or 1 million subscribers, I probably wouldn't. So praise God for small things. And the Discord, you know, the people in the Discord, some of which I've had conversations with on the channel, some of which I haven't had yet. Just delightful. Just to be able to talk. I mean, it's one of the, when we think about the life of the age to come, people talk about streets of gold. That doesn't impress me. You know what I think about? I think about never-ending conversations one with another, and we go further up and further in, and we grow together. And part of what make these conversations go our differences. I was for years involved in two listservs, one Calvin in Common and the other CRC Voices. I always enjoyed CRC Voices more because there was more diversity. And diversity, I mean diversity of opinion. People on Voices fought about stuff. They had things they cared about, and some of the battles were pitched battles that have gone on for decades, but they cared enough to talk, and they cared enough to share, and they cared enough to fight. And part of what my confessional conversation is about learning to fight well. If you read marriage therapy books, one of the things that you'll see is that a good marriage is not a marriage in which there's no conflict. And Jordan Peterson hit that dead on right. A good marriage is a marriage in which the conflict is productive. And that's the same in a denomination. It's the same in a relationship. So when I say things that are not necessarily applauding about Jordan Peterson, adults get that. That, plenty of people say things that are not applauding about me. I recently noticed that in the comment section. I don't know that he's a bot. I don't think he's a bot, but there's one guy that keeps jumping into the comment section and just a little phrase of, a terrible laugh or horrible video or something like that. And I don't know if it's a really tricky bot or if this person is actually just wanting to just be an out and out troll. And part of me likes him in there because if nobody gets upset about what I do, then I'm not probably doing it right. And Peterson did that. So all of this to say that at the end of the video that I'm about to play, there's a misordered notice about some stuff about Peterson, and it really expresses exactly how I feel about Jordan. And again, I don't have a personal relationship with him. I'm about to say exactly what I say at the end of it, but I deeply appreciate his work. And I know a lot of you who I talk to do so too. And it doesn't mean that Jordan is perfect. By no means. It doesn't mean I agree with everything that Jordan thinks or says or does. I don't. Gosh, look at a healthy marriage. Look at two people who are married for 20, 30 years that have all kinds of disagreements. And, to me, that's a sign of a healthy marriage because it's two people that can actually share a household and share a roof and recognize that as human beings, we are very limited and quite often wrong. And so this is perhaps deep in the DNA of my entire project and perhaps my ministry, that I want places where people can talk. I want places where people can disagree. And I see it in some ways at the heart of, how do I add Jordan Peterson and John Vervaeke and Nuance Forum and the meetups and John Van Donk, my friend in Southern California, and Job, and why in the Discord today I made an appeal that said, if Christians are dominating the conversation with our intramural things, then the Discord server has a problem. And I noted that, thanks to Panksepp and Peterson and Maps of Meaning, you got to let the minority in your community win 30% of the time or they'll just walk away. And in some ways, Protestants deal with their problems by walking away from it. And there's something deeply unhealthy about that. But perhaps in denominations where they don't walk away, there's the deep dis-ease of a marriage in which there's no conflict because there's no other things that need to be there that often produce the conflict. So yeah, the note about Jordan at the very end of this video is misordered in terms of the sequence of videos, and I try not to do too much sequencing of videos, but from the best I tell, a good number of people watch every video that I make, or at least try to watch it if it serves them. So again, back to my heart, what do I want? I want what Jesus prays for in John 17, that his church would be one. And I want John Lennon, that the world would live as one. The one and the many, we're still trying to figure that out. And so maybe the title, maybe Confessional Conversation as a term will change. But when I listen to John Vervaeke and his little cluster who are working on that. And, Guy Sengstock and his circling. That's more Vervaekian language that I haven't quite mastered, but we're not looking to destroy one another. We're looking to love one another. That is the command of Christ, to love each other up to and including your enemies and rivals. And so, yeah, if I'm not down on the definition of a culture war is basically a gang war or a prison war, where if you're not with me, you're my enemy and I'm going to kill you. And I think the definition of civilization is its opposite. And what that means is we talk about things we don't want to talk about. And so, long-term Trinitarians talk to the biblical Unitarian. And actually, we might adjust and recalibrate, and maybe we will remain under the Trinitarian flag, but the way in which we try to understand the one and the three is more deeply nuanced. Because even when we were unselfconsciously under the flag, we were insufficiently aware of the low resolution grasp that we had. And just as orthodoxy and heresy co-evolve, so with good, productive conversations, we grow and we go further up and further into the kingdom of God. God number one and God number two. So, yeah, again, and perhaps too much front end, but there's a reason I held this video for a week, and I just watched it, which I never do, and I'm happy. I'm satisfied with it. I'm never happy with any of my videos. I'm satisfied with it, and I'm not going to delete it, but I needed a front end that said the confessional conversation about same-sex marriage, and I very much do want to. I do want to get into the Mosaic Law and this subject. And some of you said, "Well, what about creation?" Yeah, that's creation is the big thing. But as we put a lot of freight on Genesis 1 through 3, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly. So yeah, this is a front end, and I'll marry it to the rest of the video. And here it is for Monday. 19. Will that be April 20? I don't know, probably, but here it is. Hi, this is Paul. Last week I did a video on same-sex marriage and the Bible, and got quite a bit of response to it. A number of people said they appreciated it. Some didn't. I wanted to do another video. I want to do a video on same-sex marriage and the Mosaic Law. But before I do that, I wanted to do a video on a little bit more focus on same-sex marriage and why it's such a reactive issue. And what do I mean by reactive? Well, if you look at my conversation I had with Dr. John Sook, John, like many, note that for them, this was a watershed issue, that he simply could no longer in good conscience pastor in a church or a denomination where gay and lesbian people didn't have equal dignity. That's usually the language that's used. And many people feel that way. And that's something that's part of the reason that this is such a divisive issue. People are so reactive to it, partly because for many people this issue is so instinctive. It's pre-conscious for many people in terms of how they feel about it, yet it seems to be an issue that's mutable for many. Many people have changed their mind on this. So why is this topic so reactive? The video I made predictably attracted attention and comments. People are very sensitive about the topic, and it's a relationship breaker. This issue has broken up churches, it's broken up families, it's broken up relationships. This both facilitates a conversation because it's not difficult to get interest, but it impedes a productive conversation because people can't stand to hear nuance or tolerate differences in it. And once you call someone a bigot, a lot of people won't continue to talk to you. Or once you decide something else in this decision, people will walk away. Now, why? Well, status. And part of what was interesting about the conversation between Eric Weinstein and Daniel Smachtenberg is the end of that 3-hour some long podcast. Had a very interesting conversation about status, and I played some of that in the video that I talked about, Weinstein and Smachtenberg, the search for fulfillment beyond status and pleasure. We as human beings are very sensitive to status, and you will hear different reasons for that. And depending how you stand on another hot button issue, such as evolution, status is tied to a great many topics and subjects, and status is a top-level matter of interest for us. Evolutionary biologists will say this is because we're primates. That then triggers the evolutionary debate. We might argue that because we're deeply social, and we're more social than any great ape we find on the planet. We have language, we have complexity. We are, in fact, very different. Now, there are a lot of issues that historically, in terms of human beings, are boundary marker issues. And these debates are often deeply tied, as is this debate, to religious questions. As late as 1999, you can find the Dalai Lama. If you do a little search, Dalai Lama, same-sex marriage, you'll find, or Dalai Lama homosexuality, you'll find a variety of quotations from the Dalai Lama that don't look terribly in line with a lot of the people in our culture who really like the Dalai Lama. But there are a bunch of other issues out there that you would imagine should also be just as divisive, but aren't. And I'd say two of them are food and body markings. Body markings can include tattoos. If you look at certain African tribes, there is scarring that will be on the face or the chest or the arms. Circumcision, of course, is a huge one. And if you look at Andrew Sullivan, he's one of these people out there calls circumcision male genital mutilation. The anti-circumcision debate, sort of like the anti-vaxxer debate, that's a big one, and you can generate some heat, but it's failed to attract national interest in the way that same-sex marriage has attracted national interest. Food is another one. You look at almost every significant religious tradition, there are serious and seriously held food prohibitions. Buddhists won't eat meat, but they will eat plants. Jews obviously have a fairly rigorous dietary law. Muslims have a fairly rigorous dietary law. In fact, the dietary laws and circumcision, if you read, I made mention of the book of First Maccabees in my Palm Sunday sermon a couple of weeks back. Read the book of First Maccabees. It's a fascinating book. You know, the Maccabean revolt happens over not only statues in temple, but also sacrifices and dietary laws and circumcision. These things come up in Christianity in the New Testament quite often, but in a different way. And then I just found on Twitter today a Dear Prudence column. My white girlfriend told my black mom that eating vegan is like the civil rights movement. My mom refuses to talk to my girlfriend until she apologizes. But that gets into, in a sense, a neo-paganism, a new rise in the relationship between food and morality that we hadn't really seen in our culture in a long time. Now, the reason for this is the significance of Christianity for our social history. And again, to bring up one more time Tom Holland's book, Dominion, which makes that point strongly. The history of Christianity is deeply tied to Western culture. Nietzsche saw that. It should be the most obvious thing around. Dietary laws and circumcision were both blunted as religious issues by Christianity. Notice how hot they remain for Islam and Judaism. Food is a universal concern for religious moral communities in many ways, just as much as sex is. In Christendom and post-Christendom, our religious moral flexibility around food is noteworthy and, in some cases, threatened. Now, why do I dare to discuss this matter of same-sex marriage? There are a lot of reasons why I don't like talking about it. In fact, after I made this video, I got into some discussions with some Christian friends that I deeply respect, and it's just a tough decision. And I don't like the drama. I don't like the division that it causes between Christians that I respect deeply. Both straight and gay Christians I respect deeply. And so these are tough issues. And I, in many ways, because I'm in the Christian Reformed Church and because of where I am in the Christian Reformed Church, this is a hard issue for me. There was a few years ago, I wrote a whole series of blog posts about this because I just had to think about it, and I had to think about it through blogging and through talking, and it's really difficult to find productive conversation partners as a Christian surrounding this issue because there's so much polarization, and if you just pose a question that seems to be leaning towards one side or the other, both sides jump in with what they think is their defeater thing, and conversation closed. Now, a friend that I made when I started making videos, he contacted me very early, and we have some mutual history, he and I, has started a thing called Nuance Forum with this, I think, terribly killer conversation bait, let's say. When was the last time you had a satisfying conversation? It's like, wow. And so if you Google Nuance Forum, you can find it, and this is something that he's working on. And if you live in Nashville, Tennessee, or Santa Barbara, California, it's something that you may be able to participate in once we all get out of lockdown. But, one of the things I really appreciated him is that he talks about 10% conversations, which are the conversations we have about the 10% of the things that we find it impossible to have conversations about. And he talks about belly-to-belly conversations where we have to do this face-to-face. And so in many ways, he's been following what I've been doing with meetups, and he's been experimenting in other ways. But he and I are big believers in, really, we found each other via Jordan Peterson, and it's no accident. Because Peterson saw very quickly that you have to talk about these things. If we're going to think through them, a big part of thinking is talking. And of course, Peterson, brought in Jung in this idea that you will find what you're looking for in the place you don't want to look. So you will have to address what you need to address with the things you don't want to talk about, but that's going to involve learning how to talk about what you very much don't want to talk about. And that is in keeping with my pastoral experience, that if you go into an unhappy marriage, there are things that people don't want to talk about. And probably if you're a pastor or a therapist or just a friend trying to help them out, some of those things they are going to have to talk about, but they can't talk about it because they've tried talking about it and it hasn't gone well and everything's blown up in their face. And so you find ways of talking about, of holding ideas in your head that you find abhorrent. And it isn't that different in some ways from Jordan Peterson describing the person with claustrophobia first, looking at an elevator and then getting closer to the elevator, or the first person with agoraphobia, desensitizing it. I mean, if we're going to make progress on polarized things, we have to talk about difficult issues. Now, maybe I'm crazy wanting to use YouTube for that, but I'm probably crazy using YouTube at all. So we proceed with caution, and yeah, there'll be people that unsubscribe to my channel because of this, and there'll be people that drop a bomb in the comment section and run away from it, and there'll be people that just go into the comment section to troll. But all of that has to be endured if you really want to look in these difficult places and have these difficult conversations. And if you work at it, and I've seen this in my friend who's doing Nuance for him, what you begin to develop are the skills to lead other people into it. And this, I think, is one of the most important things we can do now. Now, it was very interesting for me when I brought up same-sex marriage. Bang, it's almost like the word marriage isn't seen. Now, marriage and sex are deeply tied, but they're two separate topics in many ways. And the reason they're not, again, is Christianity. Both are common concerns in religion. Almost every religion will have some degree. Well, actually, that's not even true. If you look at a lot of ancient faiths, and I've made this comment in other places, most ancient religious people, what you did with your body sexually didn't matter. It mattered to the Jews, and therefore with the Abraham religions, it mattered. But in many other religions, do what you want sexually as long as you pay the gods off at the temple and do those rites and give your offerings to the priest and to the temple. You can do whatever you want. And if you don't believe me, look at the classical period. Look at the Romans and the Greeks. Now, there might have been lines, and we'll get into some of those as we get into the series a little bit more. There might have been lines to look at, but for the most part, a lot of religions, ancient religions, didn't police sexuality, or at least not very much. Usually apart from some of the policing that went along with marriage, and I've already talked about marriage a little bit, that traditional marriage and the history of marriage was about inheritance and bloodline. And so in that case, usually the sexual activity of women was policed, but not so much men. And I talked about that a little bit in the last video. That'll come up in further videos. The Hebrews, however, were sexually peculiar and were really, compared to many other nations, the nations around them, quite prudish. Public nudity was not something that they were down with, and the Hebrews were restrictive when it came to sexuality. Now, Christianity, in fact, binds them more closely and intensifies not only some of the stuff that's implicit in the Hebrew scriptures, but also equality at the same time. So I have on my screen, for those of you watching the video, a couple of books. Melinda Selmish, which I'll probably bring these books in further on into the series. Sexual Authenticity, which is a fascinating book. She's I don't remember if she's bi or lesbian, but she becomes a Roman Catholic convert and works through the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church, which, as compared to many Protestant churches, are particularly restrictive when it comes to certain topics. And so it's a fascinating book where she reflects on these issues as she's trying to work through them as someone who's trying to be faithful to her church. Another fascinating book by Kyle Harper, From Shame to Sin, The Christian Transformation of Sexual Morality in Late Antiquity. And if you've read Tom Holland's Dominion, you know that, and I think Tom Holland is right on this, and other authors have commented, the types of issues we're dealing with today are in many ways analogous to the kinds of issues that were dealt with in late antiquity, about the time of Augustine. And one of the things that Tom Holland brings up quite clearly in some of the videos, if you don't have to read his book, you can watch a couple of his videos with Unbelievable, is that the Apostle Paul begins to admonish men to be bound to the same sexual ethic as women. That's a radical thing in the world. And it frankly had become part of Christian aspirational sexuality, and continued to be aspirational and continues to be aspirational. But that therein the connection of this Hebrew sexuality with an idea of equality, this is unique and transformational in the world, because it's not pragmatic because of the differences in male and female sexual reproduction. And the Apostle Paul brings this in, and that being in the New Testament changes the playing field. And that's deep within this conversation. I would argue we'd not be having this conversation without Christianity. And I've made that point many times, and I was really happy to hear Tom Holland make it, because he's right. And he certainly didn't get the idea from me, and I certainly had the idea long before I read any Tom Holland's books. It's just true. Now, what's interesting in the American political scene is that the Democratic Party and some libertarians tried to divide the question. And if you're old enough to remember the debates before really the 20-teens, 2004, Barack Obama opposed the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, which was signed by Bill Clinton, which allowed states to refuse to recognize same-sex marriages legally established in other states. It previously prevented the federal government from recognizing same-sex marriages until the Supreme Court ruled that provision unconstitutional in 2013. But Barack Obama was against same-sex marriage in his 2008 campaign. The state of California voted against, by majority, same-sex marriage in 2008, Prop 16. Big debates. And just Google, you can read lots of articles from that time. Domestic partnerships giving same-sex marriages the same legal rights, equaling it, but not using the word. Civil unions came up. And we're going to get into this when we get into a couple of books on the history of marriage, probably in further episodes of this series. The libertarian cry was keep government out of the bedroom. And one person once said to me, the love that wouldn't say its name now won't shut up. The world has changed dramatically in a very short amount of time. Just June, go anywhere and you'll find rainbow flags everywhere hung by business. You don't want to be on the wrong side of this issue if you're a business, or you're going to get Chick-fil-A'd. How did they win? They made it about equality. That's the key thing. They made it about equality. Well, how did that change the dynamic? Well, remember hierarchy? Use one powerful Christendom value, which is equality, to submerge a less powerful, already flagging one, which is the Christian aspirational norms surrounding marriage and sexuality, which took a huge hit in the sexual revolution. It's a very clever way to win a political battle. Take two values in a hierarchy, use one against the other, make it about equality. And even now, you ask people, well, what about same-sex marriage? It's about equality. That's what this is about. That same-sex couples should have equal dignity, and people with same-sex attraction should have equal dignity. And that was what the Supreme Court decision was about. It's about equality. All right? Now, equality and morality have a very interesting history in the United States. The civil rights movement for the United States, for generations, became their living experience of morality. And the involvement of Christianity in this is often lost. And again, you see it in this joke that I saw. My white girlfriend told my black mom that eating vegan is like the civil rights movement. Everything is like the civil rights movement because the civil rights movement became morality itself. And this itself has a long history of the Civil War, Uncle Tom's Cabin, Christian revivalism and nonconformity. In many ways, America was founded at the merger of two of humanity's most powerful forces. The Puritans and Pilgrims in New England, they were religious nonconformists, followed by the Quakers and other religious exiles out of Europe, demanding religious freedom. Look at the story of Roger Williams in Rhode Island. And industry, really in many ways, if you consider tobacco a drug, the Virginia colonies would not have gotten started if it hadn't been for tobacco. Read 1493, Charles Mann's interesting book, because all of the economy, all of the two colonies, they were all struggling, almost dying out, if it hadn't been for rushes of new immigrants from England seeking religious freedom. They couldn't agree with each other, so they had separate colonies, Quakers and Puritans. They couldn't agree with each other. And so in the north, but in the bottom, it was in the southern states, it was tobacco. It was tobacco that saved them, because the world couldn't get enough tobacco. And in fact, in those colonies, they had to require farmers to grow enough food, because they were planting tobacco as fast as they could, because it was selling as fast as it could. Tobacco was, in many ways, the cocaine or the opium of the New World. And America, in many ways, is the marriage of those two things, religion and drugs. And now, so these things got going, and it's also important to remember the progressive movement of the 19th century, because that has a part to play in this. But again, a lot of this is not seen, but what happens in the American psyche is that equality becomes such a driving force in the country that it really takes over. Now, this, of course, gets played out with what I call progressive liberationism, and it's being played out with the woke wars today. Neil Shenvi, with his Shenvi apologetics, he keeps reading these books and keeps writing these little summaries of these books and book reviews of a lot of the books coming out from the critical theory tribes. And just here's another chart that people say: examples of manifestations of social oppression. Heterosexism. Who are the oppressors? Heterosexuals are the oppressors, along with whites and Christians and men, all the normal list. What was the Christian aspirational norm but heterosexuality? And it's now become an oppressing group. Moral status is given to those who are not from the oppressing group, and people should ask a really difficult and uncomfortable question: why the enormous and sudden spike of youthful, sudden onset gender dysphoria? Is it biological? Is it genetic? Or is it social? These are difficult questions, but watching the kinds of crises that are going on, a lot of which Benjamin Boyce has been keeping up with on his channel, stuff is going on. Well, we don't want to talk about it. There's things you can't say, and in fact, Benjamin Boyce is documenting how so many people can't say anything about this because they're afraid. Now, the dirty little secret is, well, it's not really a dirty little secret. Read Andrew Sullivan. Andrew Sullivan was an activist on the forefront of marriage equality. But many of these activists grew up in the age of Born That Way. And so marriage equality was won on the back of Born That Way. Same-sex attraction is an immutable quality, affording its status to a protected class. But as many have been noting, the B, the T, the Q, and a lot of the other alphabet letters threaten the older activists. And so, as David Chappelle notes in his Netflix comedy show, they don't all get along when they're in the same car. And if you think the social justice warriors are hot in terms of fighting heterosexual white males, they really get upset by people like Andrew Sullivan and old-time feminists, TERFs as they're called. So what happened was, well, they've sort of unleashed they've seeded the wind and unleashed the whirlwind. So there's continued movements in the high registers of Christian value stack, which again is equality, but also liberty. And people's experiences are, well, I remember talking to a friend of mine who is a little older than I am. I guess Andrew Sullivan was, boy, he's almost exactly my age. A few years older, 5 years older than Andrew Sullivan and I, and he just told me he's a gay man, and he said bisexuals are gays in denial. I thought, whoa, if I would say that to my kids, boy, I'd really hear it. And what we see from Protestant churches that have been in decline for a very long time, this is the Wellesley Village Church in the Wellesley Village Church in Wellesley, Massachusetts. They're sorry, I got distracted. They're a UCC, United Church, it's not United Church of Christ, United Congregation, I forget what UCC stands for, but they're one of the old New England congregational churches. And similar to Unitarian Universalists, but not exactly. And when I was in Wellesley, not too long ago, they've got all of the correct flags out for a church of their style. And then welcome is our favorite word. And, well, welcome is their most earnest word because they're trying like crazy to bring in people. Now, the question is, why go to church? And what happens in Protestantism is that there's this institutional modulation. It's sort of institutionally they sort themselves out, unlike Catholics and Orthodox. And they're celebrating the latest trends in social spirituality, but the celebration has long since moved outside of the institutions, and everybody's glad that they're there and doing things, and they'll be fine, and we certainly are. They're not going to get written up in the newspaper for all the bad stuff that all these other more conservative people aren't doing, and they're dragging their feet, but they're just there waving their flags. But these issues are not easy for them either, because the question of policing or not policing is a very real one. And so actually, when I have these conversations with people who are on the left in Christianity, I'll ask them, I'll say, tell me what sexuality you will police. And I'll have people say to me, I think it's wrong for churches to police anyone's sexuality. And I say, oh, really? Well, I hear progressives declare that they refuse to police the sexuality of the people. But policing sexuality is a staple of progressive activism. If there's a situation in Australia where the highest-ranking Roman Catholic clergy was sent to jail and just recently released by an Australian court for sex abuse charges. And these are big issues. I regularly find on Twitter many people from affirming churches who are just ready to denounce all kinds of people. They're policing sexuality. Well, it's about consent. Well, I agree. I think consent is vital. Well, it's about protecting children. I believe children should be protected. But these issues get very complicated very quickly. And as much as some conservatives want some bright lines around certain areas that they have difficulty living with, the lack of lines in left-leaning churches are equally difficult to live with. Because to police or no police, well, everybody's got a moral list that they need to police. And at least traditional Christianity, for all of the failings that it had, at least they had a line that they understood, even if so often they couldn't keep it themselves. And if you watch any of Jonathan Pozos' videos, you realize that this is all stock of human beings. The point that Jonathan makes continuously is something will try to bring order to the chaos. You have your center and you have your periphery, and you're always going to have these structures, and these structures lay themselves out, and people try to deny these structures, but they keep emerging, and Jonathan is sort of a gadfly that's just out there bringing up these uncomfortable things and noticing uncomfortable things about, we're not going to police anyone. I don't believe it. I don't believe it at all, because I'm watching you. You're very excited about morality. It's just your list of morality has changed. So exiling your adversary seldom yields understanding. Almost right away when I posted this video, one of the first comments I saw was this: "It's really a shame that Christians can't accept homosexual people." Now, there is so much framing and so much newness in that sentence that because we're not familiar with it, we probably don't understand. Tom Holland makes the point that 100 years ago, there was no such thing as homosexual people. You say, well, what do you mean? There have been gay people forever. Yeah, there certainly have. Certainly have been people who've been attracted to members of the same sex. There's been many, many people who have had sexual activity either in a committed way or in an opportunistic way with people of the same sex and other sex throughout human history. But the identity is a new thing. And that identity has been part of the conversation we've been having. Using the Bible to justify bigotry is not any type of Christianity I would want to follow. Okay, is that what I'm doing? There are layers to this cake that have been baked. And all the usual suspects are nested within it. Identity. Where does it come from? If you do something once, are you now a part of that group? How about if you do something twice? How about if you do something and regret it? How about if you do something and think you never should have? How about if you liked it then but don't like it now? How about if your attractions have changed? Human beings are really complex, and these things change all the time. And if we just change our labels, does that mean something? Some people who change their labels, it's publicly accepted. Other people, if they change their labels, it isn't. Presuming the motives of others? We don't even know our own motives half the time. You can sugarcoat it all you like. Is that what I was doing? But if you view homosexuality as sinful, what is homosexuality? Is it something that happens between two men? Under what circumstance? In what context? How many times? What are we talking about? These are all not easy things. So now I'm complicating it. Okay. Because I'm a bigot. Okay. And, what I say to people often is, I'm a Calvinist. I'm a bigot. I'm a racist. I'm all of these things. I believe all of those things are in my heart. So, okay. We would not choose our orientation any more than straight people choose to be straight. Well, there's a whole lot of things we don't choose, yet we do them. Some of the things we do that we haven't chosen. I mean, again, these issues are not quite so, for some people, they're very same-sex attracted. They're not very attracted to the opposite sex. Other people are very attracted to the opposite sex. Not much experience about same-sex attraction, but a lot of studies before a lot of this said people are on a spectrum. That doesn't really sit well with born that way. To what degree is this volitional? To what degree is this not volitional? These are really hard questions. And they're not questions that are only important within this sphere of conversation. You will regularly find people who gave some kinds of means of consent for some kind of sexual activity and then later regret it. And then their idea about how consensual it was, well, that story changes. This is very difficult stuff. To condemn us based on who we are is hateful and hurtful. Is this little list of declaring whites, Christian, men, able-bodied, middle-class people of every category, is that hurtful? Is that hateful? I mean, we're going to have to, one of the things that I notice is that, well, people sometimes are something like emotional burn victims. They can't take much looking into things. And I'll have to confess, I was quite reactive to this comment. And I had to check myself and say, okay, this person, I don't know who this person is. And this is part of the problem with the internet. I'm not talking to this person face to face. If I was talking to this person face to face, I would probably be a lot more gentle, a lot more patient, a lot less dogmatic, and probably try to relate to them as a person. But in this impersonal realm of the internet, it just feeds this reactivity. The fact is, you are choosing to follow a book written by man, okay, and hiding behind your faith as an excuse to hate homosexuals. In other words, there's these group of homosexuals out there. The person who writes this knows nothing about my family or my personal relationships. They're presuming an awful lot. That I hate all these people, or I hate what they're doing, or really? You know that about me? You know how I feel about this issue? Should I not work through this issue? How about all of these people that are reactive about this issue? And they have a whole lot of stuff in them that they haven't chosen either. Reactivity either way. How do we live together if we can't talk about these things? If we can't share honestly about these things? And again, as I talk about meetups, I've dealt with not necessarily this issue, but how many theological issues and difficult things. I remember when Sam, the biblical Unitarian, came onto my channel and we had a conversation, and I saw a lot of Christians from my channel who watch my videos. First contact with Sam was pretty reactive. Ooh, here's a non-Trinitarian. These are in fact reactions that had been built into us from 1,500 years ago. Us. What I mean by us. This stuff is complicated, and if we can't talk about it, we can't make progress. And quite frankly, that's a gift, I think, that's been given to the conversation by the left, because in many ways it was the left that said, we need to talk about it. And they were right, because a lot from the right wouldn't talk about it. It was all reaction. It was all fear. Well, we're going to have to dial back the fear, toughen up our skin, and try to have a productive conversation. It takes a great deal of time. If you look at some of the videos I've done on the church side of things, a lot of people are done talking on both sides. I don't think there's any point in talking. Talking doesn't change minds. Okay, maybe minds won't be changed, but maybe we'll understand each other a little bit. And maybe we'll be able to live with one another with a little bit more generosity, a little bit more grace. Maybe we'll be able to work together on things that aren't connected to this thing. Maybe we can, in fact, do less straw manning, do less reactivity, and actually have a productive conversation. So I might continue making more videos about this, so take a deep breath, because stuff will trigger you. And actually, a pandemic might not be a bad time to talk about this. Why? Because we're focused on something else. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but nobody's putting a gun to your head saying, watch Paul Vanderklay's videos. You can unsubscribe anytime you want. And back when I was taking a closer look at subscribing and unsubscribing, I would notice that people subscribe and unsubscribe on a fairly regular basis, and maybe some of them based on how I've ticked them off this week and how I haven't. How gay marriage became a constitutional right. Well, guess what? Thanks to the Supreme Court, whether you agree with them or not, they put this into a certain category and took it out of the legislative process. Now, that is both a blessing and a curse, as I think we've seen by Roe versus Wade. The Supreme Court has a way of both taking a hot potato off the table and ensuring that it'll stay hot for a decade. And that's sort of what's happened to Roe v. Wade. And that continues. There's another terribly reactive conversation that we have. And again, I agree with my friend. My friend is that we need to be able to talk about things like this. And I intend to. And what that means is that people will not agree with me. And you can call me a bigot in the comments section. You can call me stupid. You can call me anything that you want. I won't say it never hurts. Most of the time it really doesn't. But I won't say that it never hurts. And I won't say that I won't get reactive. But usually what happens when I get reactive in the comment section is a few hours go by and someone in my consciousness Congress pops up and says, Did you really want to leave that comment? Was that really the way to love this other individual? To be a Christian means loving your neighbor as yourself all the way up to and including your enemy or your adversary in a hot-button political thing. So, it's a constitutional right in America. It isn't going to change right away. So, you know what? Maybe we can talk about it. Everyone's anxious. And a lot of people, well, traditional Christians, they have so much power. It depends a lot on where you live in the country. Okay? Traditional Christian communities have a lot to lose in this. Look at the question about Christian colleges, financial aid. There's a lot going on in this, and a lot of Christians are very scared about this. And you might say, oh, they have it coming. Okay, well, maybe they do. But we got to talk about it. And I want to find ways of talking well about it. So let's have the conversation. Now, in my last video, I talked a little bit about Jordan, and some of you thought maybe I was too hard on Jordan. I think in many ways, I mean, I don't have a personal relationship with Jordan Peterson. We've only conversed. We had that 1 half-hour conversation, which you can find on YouTube, on my channel. We've had slight conversations via email a couple of times, hardly anything. He sent me a very gracious note when my daughter died, when my sister passed away. I've sent him some notes, just extending my sympathy and prayer for his wife's illness and his own illness. And that's it. I don't think it is, I don't think you're doing Jordan Peterson a favor by putting him up on a pedestal. Why? Because as a pastor, I know I am most wary of the people who put me on a pedestal, because it's for their own reasons that they've put me on a pedestal, and they can very quickly and very easily take me down from that pedestal. And I'll tell you, you can find this in the Jordan Peterson community. Those people who put Jordan up on a pedestal and then kicked him off it, that's no fun if you're the person that's been put on the pedestal and been kicked off. So when I see someone putting me on a pedestal, I take a step back. Read the Slate Star Codex review of 12 Rules for Life. Scott Alexander is someone that we would expect would not be a Jordan Peterson fan. And I'll just read a little bit of the first part of it. His blog posts are very long. So I got Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life for the same reason as the 210,000 people, as the other 210,000 people, now maybe more like 3 or 4 or 5 million people, to make fun of the lobster thing. Or if not the lobster thing, then the neo-Marxism thing, or the transgender thing, or the thing where the neo-Marxist transgender lobsters wants to steal your precious bodily fluids. But I'm really embarrassed to say this. I totally understand if you want to stop reading me after this, or revoke my book review license, or whatever. But guys, 12 Rules for Life is actually good. The best analogy I think of is C.S. Lewis. Lewis was a believer in old religion, which at this point has been reduced to a cliche. What could be less interesting than hearing that Jesus loves you, or being harangued about sin, or getting promised heaven, or threatened with hell? But for some reason, when Lewis writes, the cliches suddenly work. Jesus' love becomes a palpable force. Sin becomes so revolting you want to take a shower just for having ever engaged in it. When Lewis writes about heaven, you can hear harp music. When he writes about hell, you can smell brimstone. Jordan Peterson is a believer in the new religion, the one where God is the force for good inside each of us. I'm not sure if Alexander really has Peterson right on this, but and all religions are path to wisdom, and the Bible stories are just guides on how to live lives. This is the only thing. This is the only thing even more cliched than the old religion. But for some reason, when Jordan writes about it, it works. When he says that God is a force for good inside of each of us, you can feel that force pulsing through your veins. When he says Bible stories are guides to how to live, you feel tempted to change your life goal to fighting Philistines. The politics in this book leans a bit right, but if you think Peterson if you think of Peterson as a political commentator, you're missing the point. The science in this book leans a bit Malcolm Gladwell, but if you think of him as a scientist, you're missing the point. Philosopher, missing the point. Public intellectual, missing the point. Mythographer, missing the point. So what is the point? About once per news cycle, we get a think piece about how modern life lacks meaning. These go through the same series of tropes: the decline of religion, the rise of science, the limitless material abundance of modern society, the fact that in the end all these material goods do not make us happy. If written from the left, something about people trying to use consumer capitalism to fill the gap. If written from the right, something about people trying to use drugs and casual sex. The vague plea that we get something better than this. 12 Rules for Life isn't such a think piece. The think pieces are people pointing at a gap. 12 Rules for Life is an attempt to fill it. And this isn't unprecedented. There have always been a handful of cult leaders and ideologues making vague promises. But if you join the cult leader, you become a cultist. And if you join the ideologues, you become the kind of person Eric Hoffer warns you about. 12 Rules is something that could, in theory, work for intact human beings. It is really impressive. The non-point missing description of Jordan Peterson is that he is a prophet. And I think that was right. He's John the Baptist. He's the unauthorized exorcist. And actually, Peterson, for me, was an example of someone who, and he certainly paid for it, someone who tried to have a conversation. Now, maybe he didn't always do it perfectly. I certainly won't. None of us do. But he was courageous. He was provocative enough to make you look in places you didn't want to look. He was honest. That's not a small thing in the public view, because you will not be rewarded for honesty by many people today. Well-behaved people seldom make history, men and women. And this is the Jordan Peterson we need back, because Peterson did this, and he did it well. And so I'm no Jordan Peterson. I know that. You can look at my number of YouTube subscribers. That will tell you I'm a pretty unimportant person. Oh, you have more status than me. Some of you will say, "Oh, I can't have a conversation with you whenever I want." Yada yada yada. That's all true, but status-wise, not that important. Peterson was able to facilitate this and to prompt this, and it was via Jordan Peterson that we could develop some of this culture in our meetup and on the Discord server. And it was what brought myself and my friend who started Nuance Forum, is what brought us together. And so Jordan, thank you, because you did this and you did it well. And I really hope you get well, and I really hope your second book isn't decadent compared to the first book. I hope you break new ground. I hope you're healthy. I really want you to come back. I really want you to do Exodus. But what Peterson did was open up a space for many of us to have difficult conversations, because we need to. And we need to have them about this topic. And Christians need to figure out how to do it because they've done it poorly. And people on the left need to figure out how to do it because they've done it poorly. We need each other, and we need to work through difficult things.